when we think about ROI, getting the ROI on a data science investment, that's the denominator. That's the investment part, which is typically people and tech stack. So that makes sense. I also like the focus on extending out a model to different types of environments and different versions. So I would think that's almost more on the numerator side, the return part, where if I build one model, then I can extend it out across different use cases. I can extend it out to different types of deployments. So if it sits in the cloud, I can just rewrite it so it sits on an edge. So that to me is very interesting and very compelling. It used to be that if I wanted to do that, I would have to rewrite that model every time. And that would be kind of a pain to do that for all those different types of environments and use cases. And that's part of the problem that keeps data science from being scalable, is that now I have to rewrite this whole thing and go through the whole effort and train it and deploy it. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that. How are you seeing companies leverage your technology to do that, so that I don't have to rewrite models again and again and again, and I get the most out of my initial efforts?
Yeah, so I think our job is to empower the data scientists, the machine learning engineers to do more, to deliver more value, to be heroes, right, internally, right? So obviously, if they get stuck and there's nothing getting into production, or nothing scaling, or the value is not coming out, then at some point even the CEO is like, what's going on, right? So our job is to really empower these people, and so let them be bolder, right? If something succeeds, they can be bolder. They don't need to be afraid that something's going to fail. So there's some obvious things, like, unless you think about it, you're like, and once somebody tells you that, you're like, oh, actually that makes sense, right? So a lot of times, you need scalability in the sense of, like, you need to take something you've done once and do it 50 times, right? And not because you've got more data, but like, here's a very simple example that you don't necessarily think of. Let's say you're operating in Europe. And in Europe, you have these data privacy laws, very much more stringent data privacy laws. So we've come across people that are like, hey, I have a customer, I've got my own customers. And so I've got to do the same thing. I'm doing this thing, for these 20 customers, but these customers themselves are operating in these different countries, 20, 30 different countries. And I have to segment the pipelines, right? Because I can't intermingle that stuff. So all of a sudden you take 20 times 20, you have like 400 things, right? So let's say you've got, you're a manufacturer, and you've got, or your CPG or whatever, and you've got customers, that are maybe buying your product and they're selling it to the consumer, right? Maybe it's a supermarket or something, right? And so let's say you're trying to optimize, how do you optimize some kind of forecasting or production thing for that supermarket. But the fact is, you've got multiple of these customers that are buying your stuff, and they're operating in different countries. So it multiplies, right? So all of a sudden, instead of one model and one production pipeline, you have to make variations of that model and tweak it a bit for every one of these scenarios. And now all of a sudden you have several hundred pipelines, right? So that becomes that's a scale, in the sense I have to repeat the same thing over and over again. If you imagine you have to do that manually, right? If it took you, 2 weeks to do the first one, and every one is 2 weeks, and then you need to monitor them, and you need one person to sit there monitoring each one, right? That's going to take you like 5 years to do, and you're going to need like hundreds of people to sit there monitoring what's going on, right?
Right.
So this kind of scenario is, and so what happens is that people limit what they're doing. They're less bold. They're less willing to do complex things, because it's complex, right? And so therefore they limit the potential of the AI. They do the simplest things, right? Because they're having so many challenges doing this more sophisticated stuff. So our goal is to let them go crazy. Let them do, just click, press, make a copy. Click, press, make a copy. Go to the dashboard. Go see how all these models are doing, right? And so when you empower them, they're free to actually do what they really want to do.
Right.
Right. And so, that's our goal. And so this idea of like being able to repeat the same thing and create different variations and have different use cases and try different things. And don't be afraid that it doesn't work. Doesn't work, great. You click the button, you undeploy it, make a change, redeploy it, run an A/B test. So that's really, I think one of the things we're seeing is because people are being so constrained with the tooling that they had, and because it takes so much effort to get stuff into production, and because they're limiting the possibilities, right? And we want to kind of empower them to be bolder. We want to empower them to get value faster. We want to empower them to kind of really deliver for the business.
I think that's right. It's going to limit how bold, to use your word, a data science is going to work. I think it's going to also, in my experience, it slows down the innovation cycle. So when deployment is such a bottleneck, I have to wait 3 months for my model to get deployed. Like, okay, I wrote this Python model. It took me a month to build it and to validate it. I love it. Now I throw it over to MLOps, and it takes them 3 months to deploy it. And I have to like spend time with them to recode everything and to translate everything, and it's not what I wanted. And then I find out 3 months later there's no value to it. So I think it slows down things quite a bit if you have sort of an ad hoc, rudimentary way of deploying these models. I think also the other problem that I've seen as well is teams try to tackle this by throwing more bodies at the problem. So you get more ML ops engineers to sit down and translate everything into the native language from Python or R, and that slows things down as well. And it's not an enjoyable process. So that makes a lot of sense.
And there's business risk too. I mean, I was talking to somebody at a bank, and I want to mention who it is. So they had developed some stuff in Python. And the team that was responsible for operationalizing it didn't know what to do with that Python. They're like, "Oh, we can't put this into production," so they rewrote it in Java. But they had issues like with the thing. This was a regulatory application. It was supposed to monitor transactions and stuff like that. And so the Java thing that went into production didn't work correctly. Ooh. And so they had all sorts of investigations. They had a fine, it was a multi-million-dollar fine, right? So this is not. It's not just like from a business perspective. There's also risk involved, reputational risk if this stuff doesn't work. There's financial risk. There's also some risk there as well, right?
Totally. Yeah, that's a great example. That's right. Some of it gets lost in translation, and you might not find out until you get the regulators knocking on your door.